Hi, welcome to our next video. This is the first video for the Part 3 CST 120 section about directories. Now, you've already dealt with directories when you've used the graphical interface, because when you use the graphical interface, directories are called folders. However, when you're using the command line and you need to reference directories, there's some information you need to know, and so that's what these videos are going to talk about. The first video will be getting into detail as to what's so special about directories and something called path names. Alright, but before we talk about directories, we need to talk about something called drive letters. And I'm going to show you the Windows Explorer window I have open here, because I want to show you something you've probably looked at and never thought about before. If you look at the list of devices and drives I have here, there's a letter that is in parentheses followed by a colon. So for instance, here the floppy disk drive has an A colon after it. Local disk, which is your internal hard drive, has a C colon after it. My DVD drive has a D colon. My thumb drive, which is called Mark Miller, has got E colon. And then I have some external devices connected in. I have a backup drive at X. My Dropbox folder for my internet storage is connected at Y. And I've got a network volume called Home connected at Z. Now, what are those? Ever since DOS started, even before Windows, whenever you connect a device to your computer that's used for storage, it gets assigned a drive letter. So the names we all see, like local disk or Mark Miller or DVD RW drive, are for us. They're not for the computer. So even Windows always uses the drive letter to refer to a particular drive rather than the name of the drive. So drive letters basically start at A, and I'm going to type on in an application that's called Notepad++, and I'm simply going to type in some letters. Oops, I wanted this as uppercase. There we go. A, B, C, I don't know if I could type correctly, C, D, E, F, G, and you would keep going until you got to X, Y, and Z. So drive letters literally run the gamut of the alphabetic letters we all use every day, starting with A and going all the way to Z. Now, drive letters only consist of one letter. So going back to my Windows Explorer window here, I have a drive connected at Z, but if I didn't have any other letters available, then I couldn't connect to a letter, for instance, like AA. And I'll just hit a couple of blank lines here. So you would never see a drive letter that looks like this. It doesn't continue. Once you have all the letters used up from A to Z, you're out of luck. Now, it would seem like 26 letters are an awful lot, and you'd never use those up. And at home, you're probably correct. However, when you're in a business that has multiple network servers where multiple people need to access different files from different pieces of hardware, it actually is possible to use up all 26 letters. So, network administrators have come up with a way so that you can reuse the letters. So for instance, one office would be connected to one group of drives, and then another office would be connected to a different group of drives, and you would simply reuse the letters in each situation. So in one office, G, for instance, if I had a G drive, that might be connected to certain documents, but in a different office, they would have a G drive that would be connected to other types of documents. So that's how you make sure you don't run through all the letters. Once you run through all the letters, you cannot connect any more storage devices. You just can't. It's the way it still works, even nowadays. Now, one item I didn't discuss yet here is that notice that after every letter there's a colon. So when you're using the command line, you actually need to remember to use the colon. So you'd have A colon, B colon, C colon, D, E, and so forth. Just go down here and complete X, Y, and Z. Now, when you're talking about the drive letters, simply saying I'm connected at A, or my drive's connected at C or D, that's fine. But when you're actually using the drive letters on the command line, you have to remember to include the colons. So for instance, going to the command line, right here, I'm in my home directory that's called Mark Monica, and notice at the very beginning it says I'm on drive C. The prompt is set up just like the prompt at Delta, so that when you open up a command line window, by default it puts you in your home directory and shows you the path, what's called the path, from the drive letter down through directories where you're currently located. And we'll talk more about drive paths in a little bit, and they're actually called path names. So I'll use the word path or words path name instead of drive path. But notice that when it's showing you where you're currently located, it shows you with the drive letter followed by a colon. And when you want to move around using the command line, you need to include that letter. Now, couple of bits more of information that you need is your drive letters are grouped to a certain extent. So let me just put a dashed line through here. Basically, you've got two broad groups. You have the A drive and the B drive, and still, even though most computers no longer come with a diskette drive, these, by default, are always assigned to diskette drives. And excuse the pop-ups there, Notepad++ tends to help you when it recognizes the certain characters that you type in match something you've typed in before. Technically, A and B are no longer up for use since nobody has, well, pretty much nobody has a diskette drive connected to their computer anymore. So yeah, if you look at your desktop, you won't see a diskette drive. If you look at your laptop, you won't see a diskette drive. And later on in the second video, where we're talking about directories and commands, I'll show you a command that will let you reassign the drive letters to be used elsewhere using a command line utility. Now, but for now, that's the way it is. C, by default, is where your local drive is connected. And if you look at your Windows Explorer window, it says local disk. That is your internal drive where your operating system is installed. So that can also be called your boot startup drive. Okay. Now, there's also the concept, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't quite finished talking about this. Okay, after your C drive, pretty much every other drive letter is up for grabs. Now, when you have a DVD drive installed in your computer, and most computers nowadays do, it will usually have the drive letter D. Now, if any of you in this class have built your own computers and have installed large hard drives and have partitioned those hard drives, you know that you can break up a physical drive into smaller virtual drives called partitions, and then each partition gets its own drive letter. Because as far as the operating system is concerned, those are individual separate drives that are connected to the computer. But all things being equal, if you've just gone out, bought something from Best Buy, and you bring it home, having the C drive as your boot startup drive and the only drive, internal drive, is the norm. And then D usually is your DVD or possibly Blu-ray drive. And then after that, the drive letters get assigned as they are freed up. So for instance, that's why my thumb drive got assigned the letter E, because that was the next available drive letter. Now, when you want to move to different drives, it's very easy. All you need to do is type the drive letter in followed by the colon. Again, remember, you can refer to a drive as either the C drive or the D drive, but when you actually need to use it on the command line, you need to remember to use the colon. So to get to my thumb drive, all I need to do is type E colon and hit enter. And now the prompt has changed to show my current directory. And you notice that it doesn't show users marked Monica. We'll talk more about this in a little bit, but when you move between drives, when you move to a new drive, a new external drive, the default location is the root of that drive. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit as we talk about the directory structure. All right, but at any rate, I've now moved over to my thumb drive, and if I use the dir command, it will list all the items that are there on my thumb drive. So it shows the 3 directories I have for the classes I'm teaching, and a few other files I've got there. For instance, a test form I need for the testing center, something else for the testing center, a couple of movies, one about OS X and one about Ubuntu Linux. But it shows everything just for that drive. And then if I want to move back to the C drive, all I need to do is type that followed by a colon, and it takes me back to the directory I was in on the C drive. So that's how you move, basically how you move back and forth between drives. Now that you know about drive letters, what we need to talk about more is what's called the directory structure. And on slide 4 in the PowerPoint, I'm going to be showing you that slide in a second, is I've got I'll call it a pretend directory structure. Let me bring it up. And it's pretend in the fact that it may not have all the exact same things your drive has on it, or it might have more directories on it, but I'm giving you kind of a basic directory structure. And any operating system used nowadays uses pretty much the same directory structure. It's called an inverted tree structure, and I'll type that into Notepad++ here. Let me get down. Inverted tree structure. Now you know what a tree structure is. You have a tree, you've got the trunk with the roots underground and the branches and leaves above you. So this is inverted, which means it's flipped upside down. So the root, as it's called, is at the very top of the structure. And the root for a directory structure is always represented by a slash. Now notice I have both C colon and a backslash here. So in Windows you use a backslash to represent the root of the directory structure. Now C is not the root of the directory structure. Only the backslash is. So if this were the E drive, and let me go back to the command line, notice here on the prompt that E colon backslash, that's showing that I'm currently at the root of the E drive. So the single backslash following the colon indicates that that's where I'm at currently on that particular drive. So it's not the drive letter that indicates you're at the root, it's the backslash. Now, starting with about Windows Vista, I think, Microsoft started introducing the fact that some commands, at least, will recognize using a regular slash. And again, I'm going to go to Notepad to type in. So by a regular slash, I mean this guy, the one you use in everyday typing for dates or what have you. And that's what's used in Unix and Linux operating systems. But prior to, I'm going to say Vista, I'm not completely sure, but I believe it was about Vista. When Windows started to support, the command line started to support using the regular slash instead of the backslash, which is what I just typed in. Now the backslash is the character above your enter key. And as I said, most commands will support that, but there's still a few commands that don't, and I don't have a list of what commands don't support the regular slash when you use it. So all I can say is you're always safe when you're using a directory structure and you use the backslash rather than the regular slash. Okay, let me go back to here. So you've got the root of the tree, and then it literally branches out below the root to other directories and files. So now we need to get into the concepts of parent directory and child subdirectory. So sometimes it's difficult to talk about those because the problem becomes almost all directories can be parent directories some of the time and child or subdirectories some of the time. So the only directory that is never a child subdirectory is the root directory. That is always a parent directory with everything else below it. So a parent directory is a directory that's above where you're currently connected, and a child subdirectory is the directories that are below where you're currently connected. So when you look at the command line here, on the C drive, and I'm going to do dir, when you look at the prompt, since the prompt is showing the directories between the root directory and your current location, it says that below the root directory is the user's directory, and then below the user's directory is my home directory, which is called Mark Monica. And then when you do a directory listing, like I just did, it lists all the directories that are below Mark and Monica. So, users is a child subdirectory of root, but it is also the parent directory for Mark Monica. Mark Monica is the child subdirectory of users, but it is also the parent directory for all of these directories. And it's also the parent directory for the file items that are listed in here as well. In real technical parlance, you would call the file items the leaf parts of the directory structure, and the directories are the branch parts of the directory structure. But you don't have to worry about leaves and things like that. The primary thing I want you to come away with is parent directories are the directories above you. So Mark Monica in this case is the parent directory of contacts, it's the parent directory of desktop. And contacts and desktop are the child subdirectories for Mark and Monica. And when I show you the command that allows you to switch the directories you're currently connected to or you're working in, we'll talk more about, or I'll probably beat a dead horse about what's a parent directory and a child subdirectory, just to keep you thinking about that and keep those concepts in your head. Now, another concept you have to get used to is something called a path name. And when you, when you look at the prompt displays your current path name. So what it's, or I'm sorry, I should get more specific than that. It not only is showing you your current path name, it's showing you your current absolute or full path name. So this is showing that I'm in the directory C:\users\Mark Monica. So that is the full absolute location where I'm currently connected on the C drive. So let me use Notepad++ again to do some examples. So if I were in the Documents directory, where I'm currently located, that directory then, the full absolute path name of the Documents directory would be C:\users\Mark Monica\Documents. Now, one thing I do want to point out is even though in the prompt here the drive letter is in uppercase, just like everything else with the command line is you can type drive letters in lowercase. Doesn't cause a problem at all. However, you need to always refer to them with that colon. Alright, so this would be the full absolute path name to the Documents directory. And then, if I also had a file name included, like syllabus, or let me do this, cst120-fa1110_syllabus.docx, you would say that C:\users\Mark Monica\CST120-fa1110_syllabus.docx was the absolute full path name to where that particular file is located. So you don't only use full absolute path names to refer to directories, you also use them to refer to files as well. Now, it's fairly easy to determine if you're looking at a full absolute path name, and that's versus the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is called a partial or relative path name. So to always be able to identify that you're looking at a full absolute path name is a full absolute path name includes the drive letter and colon at the very beginning. If you have that, then you know for sure that you've got an absolute full path name. All right, now the next concept is called partial relative path name. And that one's a little bit more difficult to grasp because it can be any length and incorporate any number of directories or file names. Oh, one thing I also that I forgot to bring up was the fact that when you have a full absolute path name, the very first slash indicates the root directory, and then the rest of the slashes are almost but not quite separators. But really what they're referring to is this first slash is then referring to the item that's underneath the user's directory. The next slash here is referring to anything following that slash is referring to the items in the Mark Monica directory. So when you incorporate the last slash, that's referring to items that are in the documents directory. So they're not quite separators, but for a lot of purposes you can kind of treat it that way. Now, getting back to relative path names, here's where the difficulty lies. I'm going to type in CST, and it's going to prompt me for syllabus, and I'm going to type the extension on. When I type that name, we have a file name. Well, in command line, that is also considered to be a partial or relative path name. So, when you have just a file name, the command line automatically assumes you're talking about a partial path that is in your current directory. So it's not going to look in any other directory for that particular file. Now I'm going to type in another slightly longer partial or relative path name. Documents /CST, and we'll just double click this, .docx. Now what I've got is I've still got the same file name, but now I've specified that it's in the documents directory. Now, we don't know where this documents directory is located. We don't know what drive it's on or anything. But what we do know is that file is in that particular directory. And when we use that partial path name with a command, it's going to assume that the documents directory you're talking about is where you're currently located, and that file, CST120-FA110 syllabus, is in that directory. Now, it does get a little confusing, and you can make these even longer. So if I just simply say Mark Monica documents.docx, again, that's also a partial relative path name. It's relative to where I'm currently located if I use this, the same way the file name by itself is relative to where I'm currently located. So if I type this in, the command line is assuming that I'm talking about a directory called Mark Monica directly under where I'm currently located, and that it will have a documents directory in it, and then the CST120-FA110 syllabus will be inside that documents directory at that point. Again, this doesn't say what drive you're on. Again, it uses those relative to where you're currently located in the directory structure. So let me demonstrate that a little bit more with some commands. All right, so I'm users Mark Monica. So for instance, I want to see what's in the documents directory without actually moving there. I can type the dir command and just simply type the directory name, and it lists everything inside that directory. But it never moves me anywhere. So what I did is, let me recall that command. What I've done is I've just given it a relative partial path name of just documents. So the command line is going to look for documents where I'm currently located. If I had simply said something like dir doc, it's going to look for something called doc, and it can't find doc. Now, what happens if instead of a directory name I simply give it a file name? Well, let me see what files I have here. If I say dir test copy.bat, it does not assume that it's a directory. First off, what it does is it goes looking for the name I gave it in my current location. So first it determines if that name exists, and then it determines what kind of item I gave it, whether it's a file or a directory. And since it's a file, it just gives me back the information about that file then. All right. Now, if I do give it a name that doesn't exist, like doc, that's why it comes back and says file not found. So the first thing it looks for is a file name that, and then if it can't find that, it looks for a directory, and then it gives you the list of items for that directory if it exists. Now, let me do a little bit more examples of using relative path names. And even though I'm using the dir command, you can use partial path names with anything. And so if I go dir documents, that shows me all my documents. So I could look in other directories below that as well. So let's see, I have a directory called access, and since that's a fairly short name, I'm going to use that. So I specify that I'm going to continue with my directory, and I'm going to specify access. And so when I do that, it then gives me a list of items that are in that access directory as well. And again, if I want to find out information about specific file in access, I use my direct backslash and specify the file name. And it gives me the information about that particular file, again, without moving me anywhere. And we'll talk about how you can move around in a little bit. Now, a couple of more things I have to talk about as far as path names go. And the one item, the major item, is on slide 8. Path names have a maximum length of 260 characters. That's an operating system specified maximum. I think the file system would let you specify more than that, but there are some techniques you have to use that we don't use in this class. But for without having to do anything special, you max out at 260 characters. And on slide 8, I actually give you an example that gets you up to 90 characters. So at first it seems like 260 are not too bad, but if you look at the path name I have here, your default directories that get created in your home directory are contacts, desktop, documents, downloads, favorites, links, music, nowadays OneDrive, pictures, save games, searches. SkyDrive is an old version of OneDrive. And then videos, okay? So in my prompt, you see that I already am in a path that uses c:\users\mark Monica. So once I start talking about files I have in my documents folder, that adds on the length of the word documents. And then if you have created directories inside of documents, that creates more of a length. So Normally all your documents get created in the Documents folder, so you already have a set amount of length on your path name that gets pre-created for you by Windows. So it doesn't take a lot, depending on how you have things organized, to add on to that and get up fairly high. But I will admit that 260 usually is good enough for anything you're going to do. Now, the only other things that I need to talk about are actually fairly important. They're called special directories. Now, up here, in the PowerPoint, I made a mistake. When I was typing out some of the information without thinking about it, I didn't test it, and I started typing some information, and the information only applies to Linux. So the two things that I talk about are on slide 8, and one is you do not see them because they start with a period. That's false. On Windows. In Linux and Unix, that's true. And I also say directory names that start with a period are automatically hidden. Again, on Windows, that's false. That applies to Linux and Unix. I want to apologize about that. However, the other item I have listed there, every directory contains these, is true. Even if there's nothing else in the directory, when you create a new directory, these two special directories get created. They're right here, these guys that I'm circling around. It's a single period and then two periods right next to each other. They are literally called dot and dot dot. And I'll type those out just to make sure you heard me correctly. So dot is a single period, and dot dash dot is the two periods. Now, what those represent is a abbreviation method to help you move around the directories. Let me go back to the command line here. So, dot keeps track of what the current directory is. So, for instance, the path, the absolute path name of this directory, C:\users\mark Monica, is stored in the dot directory. It's like a link directly to this directory. Dot dot keeps track of what your parent directory is. So the parent directory of this current directory is C:\users Mark Monica. Or I'm sorry, is C:\users. So dot dot is pretty much a link back to the parent directory of whatever directory you are in. And they come in very handy when you want to move around the directory structure. So instead of always having to use the absolute path name if you want to move somewhere else that isn't a directory below you, you can use one of those items, dot and dot dot, to move to a different location above you or elsewhere on a drive without having to specify the absolute path name. So it saves you a little bit of typing. All right. Now, dot and dot dot we're going to use more as we bring up some more commands. You use them as part of your path names. So for instance, if I use dir dot dot, that will give me a list of the items in my parent directory. So let me do that. And right now there's just a couple of directories there. There's default migrated, Mark Monica, which we were just in, and public. All right? But notice we haven't moved anywhere. And I can actually get a listing of the files in the public directory by doing dir dot dot \public. Now I didn't need to use the capital P, so let me just do public. And the dot dot is serving as an abbreviation for the C:\users part. So all I need to do is supply the child or subdirectory underneath C:\users, and it'll give me a list of all the items in that public directory, which happen to be documents, downloads, music, pictures, and videos that you could either share on the internet or share with other users of your computer. Now, the dot, what you will find out is later on, is primarily used when you want to refer to scripts you've written. Now, there's a concept called a path that the command line uses to locate programs on the computer. And it has some predefined places to look. And usually, for instance, your documents folder or here in Mark Monica is not one of them. So there was a .bat file, I believe. Now let me look. dir. Yes, testcopy.bat. So first off, I want to use type because I don't remember what's in there. Type testcopy.bat. Xcopy tester documents test. Okay, it's running a copy for a directory that I don't think I actually have in here anymore. Let me look. So no. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it. It'll give me an error because it can't find the testdir directory. But what I want to do is just simply show you is in order to run this, I need to use dot followed by a backslash to tell the command line, look in the current directory for this file, testcopy.bat. And when you do this, the .bat extension is one of those extensions that when it encounters and you use it, it automatically executes the statements inside. So that's how you create a script file on the command line. So let me do this. And it tries to execute and I get an error. But you get the idea that that allowed me to run that program. Now, that's where I'm going to stop for this video. When I start up the second video, we'll actually be talking about something called a disk part utility, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of using some more commands, especially with partial path names. So, thanks for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one.